Drew Beechum and Denny Conn join me this week to discuss hop techniques and specialty beers. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 215. This is BeerSmith Podcast number 215, and it's late May 2020. Drew Beechum and Denny Conn join me this week to discuss hop techniques and specialty beers. Thank you to this week's sponsors, Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Every issue of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine is packed with articles for homebrewers and beer lovers. They're currently offering 20% off their all-access subscription pass with access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and of course the Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com/beersmith to get your all-access pass today. Again, that's beerandbrewing.com/beersmith. And also the Brew Commander, the new complete brewhouse controller from Blickman Engineering. It's available in electric and gas propane models. The patent-pending Brew Commander is a high-quality brewhouse controller with exact precision and the ultimate in flexibility. Whether integrated or freestanding, the Brew Commander offers automated step mashing, boil timers, and amazing advanced settings. Whatever your setup, the Brew Commander offers precision temperature control with perfect repeatability. Command your brew day with a new Brew Commander. Order yours today. Go to blickmanengineering.com for more information. Again, that's blickmanengineering.com. And finally, I urge you to give BeerSmith 3 brewing software a try. BeerSmith 3 adds mead, wine, and cider recipe support to the BeerSmith brewing platform, along with new integrated water profile and mash pH tools. Dozens of new features, including cloud folders, updated databases, support for fruit, juice, and honey, as well as new Whirlpool hop options. Download your free 21-day trial today from beersmith.com and give it a try. And now let's jump into this week's episode. Today on the show, I welcome back Drew Beechum and Denny Conn. Drew is the author of the Everything Homebrew book, the Homebrewer's Journal, and the Everything Hard Cider book. Denny is a nationally ranked beer judge and also AHA governing committee member. Together they wrote Experimental Brewing and Simply Homebrewing, and also the How to Brew All-Stars book. It's great to have you guys back. Let's start with Drew. Drew, how are you?
Oh, I'm just dandy.
You look really happy there. And Denny, welcome back.
Thanks, Brad. It's always fun talking to you.
Good. Your enthusiasm makes up for Drew's. Let's start with you, Denny. What have you been up to lately?
Well, for the first part of the year, I was doing a lot of traveling. We have a book that just came out, Simple Homebrewing, so we were out there on the road doing signings and pushing that. But like everybody else these days, I'm at home. So since I don't have a book to write and all that other traveling and stuff to do, I've been like really brewing my butt off for a change, which is a new experience compared to the last few years.
Yeah, we were talking about that before the show. A whole bunch of people, I think, are starting to take up home brewing again, along with pie making and bread making and whatever else, right?
Yeah, man. And homebrew shops are doing well. My homebrew shop owner, when I stopped by to pick up a curbside order, mentioned to me that in 2 weeks, he'd made up all the money he'd lost in the previous 3 months. So that's a good thing for the shops, man.
That's good news. I'm glad to hear that. And Drew, You just got off a meeting with work, so that's why you're so happy, I guess, right?
Oh, yeah. It always leaves me with lots of joy. But unfortunately, I'm part of an industry that's considered critical infrastructure. So even though times are strange right now, I'm actually busier now than I am before all this started. So although I am still trying to do more brewing, so we have at least that.
And yeah. I think you guys both mentioned you've been doing some homebrew club presentations, which I've been doing a lot of as well. Right?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, to me, it's great to see all of the homebrewers around there and see what people are trying to do in order to kind of keep that club connection up and running. But it's also just really nice because I think it's given everybody a chance to realize that you can do this and actually have people who have opinions about beer come in and give you some education. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Although every time we finish one, I always wonder if they're thinking, what were we thinking when we invited them?
That's a good point. Yeah. I'm often
I
wondering
like to
that.
think that we're basically mutton jet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you guys had a bunch of topics you wanted to cover today. So, Denny, let's start with you. You mentioned some recent experiments you're doing using cold dry hopping, and I really haven't heard much about cold dry hopping before.
Yeah. BSG put out a very interesting paper recently called Reevaluating Dry Hopping Techniques. And it mentions a number of things, but it also mentioned people getting astoundingly good results by dry hopping at 35 degrees Fahrenheit for 48 hours, a cold, short dry hop. So I thought, what the heck? Let's find out how that goes. So I did a batch like that, and I was blown away. I think that I probably got better dry hop character than I have with any other technique that I've ever tried. So I've done 2 more batches that way since, and the results are consistent. So I intend to keep doing that. It's a really interesting thing, man. Drew and I are both using glycol chilled conicals these days. So I just cold crash the beer down to 35 for a while, and when it's about done cold crashing, I put in my dry hops for 48 hours, and that's all there is to it.
And for the metric folks, that's really close to freezing, just a couple degrees C, I think, right?
Yeah, right.
So how does that work, Drew? I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It seems like the aroma oils would be less soluble close to freezing.
Well, it turns out it's this thing called magic.
Magic, okay.
Hop magic. Yeah. No, so what it looks like, and from doing the reading and doing some of the research, a lot of it's about favoring extraction of different chemicals, right? So yeah, you're right. Temperature is one of the primary things that you worry about when you're thinking about the rate of a chemical reaction. But in this case, it seems that the lower temperature favors the extraction of, I think it's a linalool, and
linalool,
and this way you get more expression of that and less expression of the other things in the hops, like say hop tannins and just the green matter.
So it's linalool is, I believe, the aroma oil that I'm thinking of. Does that give you any fruity character? I know the geraniol gives you like a fruity character. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Never trust me to pronounce anything. The
linalool is the oil that they look at.
More kind of spicy floral.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and linalool is the oil that they look at as kind of like the benchmark of hop flavor and aroma. And so this study found that maximum extraction of linalool was reached at temperatures of 34 to 39 Fahrenheit after 2 days, and the levels were the same as if they had been dry hopped warmer for 2 weeks. The other benefits this has is it mitigates hop creep, which, let's face it, isn't a real big issue for homebrewers anyway. But it's also a really interesting technique that people are starting to play with for New England IPA, because by a shorter contact time, you reduce the amount of polyphenols you get in the beer, and therefore the hop burn that many people find objectionable in New England IPA.
Interesting. Yeah. New England IPAs, of course, have made really high dry hop levels typically, right? And
right.
And the polyphenols are the polyphenols cause clarity problems and as well as some tannic issues, I believe, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They'll cause extra haze. But the big thing is if you stop and you think about how tannin tastes, if you ever take like a little dose of like a tannic acid, like say grape tannin, it's awfully astringent. And that's good in wine where you need it to balance things out. But particularly when you're looking at these New England IPAs where you may have, 6, 8, 10, 12 ounces of hops in the dry hop. And of course, homebrewers being homebrewers, sometimes more. The less you can extract of the polyphenols, the better you're going to be. And so, and of course, the other thing is, look, if you can dry hop in 2 days as opposed to, say, 7 days, that also means that you can turn your beer around faster and have it available to you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have recommended, just in general, dry hopping shorter periods of time. Generally, you get peak flavor within 48 to 72 hours, I think, right?
Yep.
Right. Yeah. To me, this is one of those things that flies in the face of conventional wisdom. And so homebrewers are kind of resistant to that because they've always read that you do it some other way. So I really hope that more people will start experimenting with this and let us know what their results are. Because like I said, I'm sold, man. I have tried about every dry hop technique I could think of, in the secondary, in the primary, in the serving keg. And the results of this technique are so far superior that I'm not going back to any of that other stuff.
Now, do you have to start with a hop variety that has a lot of linalool? I know some of them don't have large portions. Drew?
No, I don't think you do. I think you still see the hop oils get extracted at that same rate. So, like for instance, the last one I did a beer called a real cluster fugget of a beer, and it used the YCH cluster fugget blend that they did last year, which is a blend of cluster, nugget, and fuggles. None of which I think of as being super oily hops. And it still gave me a superior hop character in a very, very short window.
Well, and Denny, go ahead.
I was going to say, quite frankly, I have not worried about the linalool content of the hops at all, because for me, this is just something I read about that I want to try and play around with and see what happens. So I've been using, let me see, I had some Veterans Blend hops from Yakima Chief. I've done it with Amarillo. I've done it with Cascade. So, for me, it's more of a learning experience than trying to recreate a study or something like that.
And Drew, have you had good results with the experiments as well?
Yeah, I have. Like I said, that cluster fugget beer that I just did, and I have it on tap right now. Normally I would have let that sit for a week or two, or actually even back in the day, I would have let it sit in the keg, like in a hop bag. And the big thing I've noticed is that, again, those are old school hops, and they have a tendency to be more grassy in a lot of ways. And doing the 2-day dry hopping, I didn't get the same grass character that I actually expected out of it. So yeah, I think it worked really well.
I had another quick question. Have you gotten any of the fruity flavors out of it? I know, like when I think about a New England IPA, a lot of them have these fruity characters that come from a combination of picking certain hops and also the techniques. Have you tried that?
Well, I'll tell you in 2 days, because I'm about to pull a New England IPA out of the tank that's been dry hopped for 2 days with what did I put in there? Citra, Mosaic, and dry hops. So
I'm sorry,
I'm
you
really
dropped out
one,
for a
I
second.
expect that's going to screw. All right, it's with I did 2 ounces each of Citra and Mosaic, the cryo pellets for dry hopping. And so I'm really expecting that to scream with a lot of fruit, right? And now my only concern is I don't want the rotten fruit flavors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, and that's my next trial too, is trying this with cryo, and the beer that I'm brewing this Saturday for virtual big brew. I'm going to be using cryo for dry hops and trying. But the Veterans Blend does have Citra and Mosaic and stuff like that in it. I'm drinking a rye IPA that I made with the Veterans Blend using this 2-day 35-degree dry hop technique. And I'm getting tangerine and mango and peach and all those fruity flavors that people want in their New England IPAs.
Yeah, we had Stan Hieronymus on a little while back, and he was talking about how, first of all, you have a pick to get the fruity flavors, you have to have a hop that has thiols in it, which pretty much limits you to U.S., New Zealand, Australia hops, because those are the ones that have that. And then you also need hops that are high in this geraniol, and I don't know how that would play with your technique, but interesting thing to try. It sounds like Drew's picked some varieties, for example, that would probably work just fine in that latest one you're making.
Well, and I know that Veterans Blend also had a fair amount of laurel in it, I think. And laurel will also have that same sort of impact.
Interesting.
Yeah, well,
go ahead.
This paper on reevaluating dry hop techniques actually has a section packs of hop variety and mentions thiols and stuff like that. So I would encourage anybody who wants to find out more about this to go out and find this. Again, it's called Reevaluating Dry Hop Techniques, and it comes from BSG. Just search for it.
Excellent. Where are you guys going next with your dry hop experiments? Drew?
Like I said, my next one's going to be this New England IPA. But I think beyond that, what I want to actually do is I want to go. The other side of cryo is the debittered leaf, or the noble American nobles. I want to actually see if that changes some of the profile that you get out of it, because those do have a tendency to have more polyphenols by nature. Because if the cryo is the concentrated material with the oil, the debittered leaf is really just the leftover bract material. And what I'd like to see is, can you do the same technique there, extract the oils that are in those American nobles, and avoid any of the additional polyphenol?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man, that's exactly where I was going too. It's interesting that we both had that same thought without discussing it. But the American nobles are great hops for lagers and stuff like that because of their subtlety. But because they are pretty much just 100% bract, they have a lot of polyphenols to them. So a lot of times when I use them in a lager, I have to do an extended cold crash to drop out the polyphenols. So I really want to try too, using them like in a dry hop situation, cold for a short amount of time, and see if it'll bring out some of the subtle aromas and stuff that you don't get out of those American nobles in other techniques.
Nice. Well, Denny, the next topic you gave me was some of the things you've been brewing lately, and I think you mentioned something called Serendipitous Pilsner. Is that right?
Pilpazan.
Oh, Pilpazan. I miss.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that was a typo or what.
No, don't worry. If you're confused by it, so were we.
Yeah, it's called serendipitous because of the outcome of it. But we were heading up to the Seattle area to go to one of our favorite homebrew shops for a book signing, Micro Homebrew in Kenmore, Washington, run by Tony Oshner. Hey, Tony, shout out, bud. Great shop, one of the best homebrew shops I've ever been in. And we asked Annie Johnson to come out too, and we decided that we would all brew a beer together. So as we were thinking through this, without any advance warning to Drew, as we were recording the podcast one day, I said, let's brew a Pilpazan. Annie is known for her Pilsner. I like pale ales and IPAs, and Drew is known for Saison. So what if we were to take Annie's Pilsner grist, use some American pale ale / IPA hops, and a Saison yeast in it? What would we get?
Okay.
So that's what we did. It's a blend of all three of our techniques and I guess our loves and processes. And so we brewed one batch of this as a brew in the bag and one batch on a Pico Z. And then did a tasting with Annie via Skype. She was on a ferry boat in Puget Sound. And when we popped the first bottle, I think that all of us were just astounded. This beer was amazingly good. When we got to discussing what we might want to change about it, the answer was pretty much nothing, which, you know, when you think about it, for a first try from a recipe from 3 different people, that's pretty astounding. I pretty much live by the saying that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. So I didn't really know what would come out of this, and we lucked out, which is why it became the Serendipitous Pilpazan.
And Drew, your thoughts on this particular brew?
Yeah, it was when he first said the name, my reaction was kind of like, what, huh? And then he described the idea, and it sounded perfect to me. I always kind of figure whenever you get a collaboration beer going, and that's really kind of what this was, is that you don't exactly get great things a lot of times. You might get some interesting ideas, but a lot of times I don't think they actually work very well. And this one, it sung. It was absolutely amazing to see what it ended up being like. And again, it was a simple grist, just because it's a Pilsner-esque grist. Although Annie cheated and added some wheat. And then, I chose probably my favorite of the standard Saison strains, which is that Y Yeast Belgian Farmhouse 3726. Mm-hmm. And then Denny, of course, just rummaged through the hop fridge and went, "Ooh, that sounds good."
Yeah, well, Tony has a great stock there in the shop, so I picked some Chinook T90s for bittering and Cascade and Citra Cryo for finishing. And like I said, man, we lucked out.
So, Drew, what did it taste like? How would you describe the flavor profile?
I think the best way to describe it is, so it was crisp with just a little bit of that bubblegum note that you get from the Blaugy strain, that 3726. And then the back end came in with all of this hop. And actually, surprisingly, given that, I think you said we used Cryo in there, right?
Yeah, Citra and Cascade.
It had a lot of amazing aroma to it and a lot of amazing flavor without actually being as bitter as I would have expected. So we got very, very lucky, because I think the Blaugy's yeast left just enough fruitiness and enough sweetness to be able to counteract any of the sort of the hop load that was in there. And so in a lot of ways, what it really reminded me of was Houblon Schoof from Brasserie Schoof. Mm-hmm. And that's a great beer. So the fact that we got somewhere in that neighborhood pleases me greatly.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Belgian American IPAs, and I've brewed several. And so I have to admit, I kind of had that in the back of my mind for this beer, but I really had no idea how it would come out. So we were very lucky and very, very happy.
Nice. Well, Drew, you wanted to talk about a beer called Wee Shroomy, which I have to assume probably includes some kind of mushrooms in it.
No, I don't want to talk about it.
Oh, okay.
Denny wants to talk about it.
Denny wants to talk about it? Okay. Well, somebody sent me a note.
Yeah, you asked us about, what kind of unusual ingredients have we been using. And one of them that I have used a number of times and just did again recently was mushrooms. In this case, chanterelles. I have to give Randy Mosher props, because the concept came from his book, The Brewer's Companion, which was my original homebrewing book. Mm-hmm. And he had a beer in there called Nirvana, which was a wee heavy with chanterelle mushrooms in it. Well, I'm extremely fortunate in that where I live, I can walk out my back door and pick chanterelles as opposed to paying $50 a pound for them. Mm-hmm. 'Cause this beer uses 5 pounds of them.
Oh my goodness!
So, yeah, but I have neighbors who are professional mushroom hunters and stuff, so they're always bringing me mushrooms. But people, you tell them about this beer, and their first reaction is yuck, mushrooms and beer. But maybe they haven't had chanterelles before, because chanterelles have this fruity, apricot-y, almost sweetness to them. And when you put that together with the heavy malt character in a wee heavy, I use Simpson's Golden Promise for it, it is just an astoundingly harmonious combination of flavors.
Drew, did you try one of these?
No, he's threatening to ship me one.
Oh, okay.
So, that's right. I forget. You had it on tap at the Seattle. Yep.
Yeah, in 2012
I've had a previous
in
batch.
Seattle. And probably one of my proudest moments was when Randy came by and actually tried it, and he liked it so well he kept bringing other people by to try it too. So I figured, okay, I've done this right. It took a long time to get the techniques down. I do a lot of things differently than the way Randy did his. So the techniques.
So, how do you work? Yeah, that's what I was asking. How do you work with something like mushrooms?
Well, you take 5 pounds of chanterelles, You brush the dirt off. You don't want to wash them because you don't want to get any water into them that will dilute the flavor. So I brush the dirt off. I chop them up. I vacuum seal them and I freeze them. And when I thaw them out before I add them to the secondary with the beer, there's a whole lot of liquid that's exuded from the mushrooms and just has tons of flavor to it. So all the liquid and all the mushrooms go into a secondary, and the wee heavy gets racked on top of it. And this is Scott Abean's Trackware House wee heavy recipe. So basically what you also do is you take your first gallon of runnings out of your mash and you boil it down until it's only about a pint, this heavy sticky syrup. And you add that back into the kettle with the main wort at the end of the boil.
And what does that accomplish? I never heard of that technique.
It gives the beer a lot of richness.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I've actually recommended doing that in the past for not only wee heavies, but for anything where you want to have a fairly simple grain bill, but you want to have a really intense malt character. So it's pretty easy to do. All you need is just a pot and a burner somewhere. So, and it doesn't even have to be a large pot, and it doesn't even have to be a large burner. So I know you can just totally take that first bit of runnings and walk it over to your stove and put it on there and boil it down.
Now, Denny, do the mushrooms create any special problems in the secondary? Does it kick off another round of fermentation? Is it oily? I don't know.
No, nothing like that at all. The biggest problem I've had in the past is trying to rack the beer out of the fermenter with mushrooms getting stuck in the racking cane. But I did not have that issue this year for some reason. They sunk and stayed put really nicely.
Have you considered bagging them? Like, a lot of times when I'm working with fruit, I'll bag the fruit.
Brad, that is way too sensible, man. Why would I ever think of that?
I don't know. I put them in a grain bag, and then you can pull them out when you want.
You know what? Next time, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to call it the Brad Smith technique.
That would be great, yeah.
But it's really interesting, and if you match the mushrooms to the beer, you can use other mushrooms. For instance, portobellos in a brown ale are a wonderful complement. They really kick up an earthiness that complements a brown ale but doesn't overwhelm it. There's a variety of mushroom that some of my mushroom hunter friends go out and find called matsutake. In Japan, I guess these things go for about $400 a pound. So they take all the ones that aren't pretty that the Japanese buyers won't buy, and they bring them to me, and I've used those like in a Duvel type of beer. Matsutakis have been described as tasting like a combination of Red Hots and dirty socks. So lovely. You do kind of need to be. Yeah, right. I tried eating some just straight, and I couldn't do it. But if you use them carefully in a beer, especially something like a Golden Strong, they work really, really nicely.
Any other more common mushrooms you might recommend? Because not all of us have access to some of those exotic ones.
Portobellos and creminis, those are pretty much available in your local grocery store. And like I said, those go really well in a brown ale. They might go into a Belgian dark strong. I've never tried it. So If somebody does, let me know.
Well, Drew, another topic we wanted to discuss, and we did discuss it in a little bit of detail, I think last time I had you guys on, but your simple homebrewing book. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about the book overview, and then we'll maybe get into a little detail here.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing about the book, because we've had a lot of people question, like, hey, why do I need to have a book about simple homebrewing? I already know what I'm doing. And the real crux of it is this is a distillation of all the things that Denny and I have found to be important over the years. So it's taking as much of the information that's out there and that's current and weeding out the stuff that we don't think that you need and giving you the lessons that we think are the most important so that you can develop, how to brew. And most importantly, that you can brew in a way that not only satisfies you, but also makes it so that you're happy to brew. You're excited to brew. I noticed, Denny was talking earlier about like he'd stopped brewing for a while or didn't have the time to brew. I went through a same thing where I kind of had a fallow period because it was just so much work for me to kind of get up and do something in the brewery, right? Because I had all this gear, I had all these questions running around in my head about what was I going to do with this, that, and the other. Um, and it just kind of became enough of a weight in the process that I didn't want to do it anymore. And I didn't for a while. And so the part of the impetus behind Simple Homebrewing is trying to remind people that, there are things that you can do to make the beer that you want to make and make the process simple enough that it's also very, very enjoyable. And that, of course, is going to vary for everybody.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What we say is make the best beer possible with the least effort possible while having the most fun possible. Because, homebrewing is a hobby. It should be fun. I was on an internet forum a couple months ago, and somebody posted a question and said, "What do you stress most about when you're homebrewing?" And I'm kind of like, dude, if you're stressing about homebrewing, then you are definitely doing something wrong. This should not be a stressful kind of thing. So the book is about helping you identify what makes homebrewing fun, what makes homebrewing worthwhile for you, and helping you get to your fun place while you're homebrewing. Now, we hear from a lot of people who go, simple homebrewing, I don't need a beginner's book. I've been brewing for years. Simple Homebrewing is not a beginner's book. And probably the longer you've been brewing, the more you need to read this book. And like Drew said, simple is something different for everyone. For some people, it's brewing a bag on your stove. For other people, it's having a big fancy system. But the key is identifying what makes brewing worthwhile to you and focusing on that and getting rid of the stuff that doesn't make a difference to your beer or that is a hassle and a stress point for you.
Yeah, one of the things I talk about quite often when I'm doing designing beer presentations is the fact that because of the way the homebrew community and the craft brewing community evolved, we're a lot more technical than communities that make mead or wine or cider even. And I think sometimes that can be a hindrance. Don't you think so, Drew?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I don't know how you get somebody into the hobby where, the very first thing that they're reading about is, all of this process. And so it's kind of a little terrifying. But even then, the other thing is just like I was saying, when you start to go down the rabbit hole and you start to chase like all these various things, it just starts to get you trapped into a loop. Like, I would suspect, like a great many other brewers, have issues with anxiety and sort of sometimes obsessive thoughts, and that does not help. When you're trying to figure out how to do these brew things. So for me, like one of the biggest things I figured out was part of my problem was just having to deal with all the equipment every time I wanted to brew, and I have a stand. I have a 2-tier stand, and it's a nice stand, and I can brew 20 gallons on it. And of course, I thought I was going to enjoy playing with it, and it turns out I didn't. And so for me, I think what ended up making my life more enjoyable as a brewer was going and getting my hands on one of these new all-in-one systems, like the Grainfather, like I have, and being able to use that and take away all the extraneous stuff that I was having to worry about in order to brew. It made it enjoyable. It made it so that I'm eager to get back into the brewery on a regular basis.
Yeah, and Denny, I think you were around I think you've been brewing almost as long as I have in the early 90s when a lot of this technology and a lot of the equations and all this stuff really kind of came into being. That the discussion at that point was being driven by mainly scientists and engineers that had access to the early internet. And I think they drove us to a lot of the, very detailed technical stuff that we use today. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I do definitely agree with that, Brad. When I started brewing, I have a background in chemistry and science and stuff like that. So when I started brewing, I approached it from a very technical, scientific angle. And I learned a lot from that. But at this point, I feel like I have kind of like internalized all that kind of stuff and come out the other side of science, you know, so that now I'm not as concerned about every single little thing, and I'm more concerned about the big picture. If I don't hit my mash temperature, I used to just freak out and try and adjust and stuff like that. And I realized, that really doesn't matter. It's going to be beer no matter what. You have some leeway there when you're playing with it. And again, the purpose for me, other people look at this differently, but the purpose for me when I brew is enjoyment. And I want to make good beer, but the beer is secondary to me enjoying the process.
Well, I'm an engineer, and so I think. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Drew.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, when I first started in brewing, which was just about a year after Denny did, I was sort of a young and full of himself engineer. And I remember going into places like the Homebrew Digest and some of the early internet forums, and seeing all the scientific discussion that was happening and all the techno geekery and I look back at now, and now I'm no longer useful as a person. I'm now a director instead of an engineer. But if I were to encounter that sort of conversation today, and that was the main driver of the conversation, I don't know if I ever would have stuck with this.
Yeah, I agree. I'm an engineer as well. John Palmer's an engineer. A whole bunch of us are. But but you mentioned Randy Mosher, and I actually love talking with Randy Mosher. Denny, he's a graphic artist, and he has a whole different approach to beer than we do, perhaps.
Yeah, he does. And I think that's one of the reasons I loved having The Brewer's Companion as my first homebrewing book. I knew nothing about homebrewing at all, no Charlie books, none of that kind of stuff. But the attitude in Randy's book just kind of sucked me in. That and the wonderful artwork, of course.
Yeah. Drew, you were going to say something, I think?
Well, I have a friend who is a professional graphics artist as well. And he talks about things differently, to the point where it actually meets a distraction for them. Like, I have a weak spot. I can't make a good porter to save my life for some reason. I don't know why. And so I usually have to borrow somebody's recipe. And he makes wonderful porters. And I went with him once to the homebrew shop to see what he was thinking, try and figure out his thought process behind what he was doing in his porter. And he was just walking from bin to bin and going, yeah, okay, I'll do a little bit of this in there. And I'm like going, well, do you know how much that is? And he's like, no, but that should be right. And I'm like, it just
works, right?
Claims. Yeah, exactly. And, I finally, one day I forced him to actually measure everything. So that's still a recipe that I use from time to time. But it is interesting to see that different thought process. But I think you're right. I mean, the fact that there are so many of us who are technically minded has driven a certain way of being in this hobby.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, let's get. I just want to go. Go ahead, Denny. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say one example I can give with that is like how people are so intent on yeast pitching rate. And I used to be too, but I finally discovered that it really doesn't matter a whole lot. If you get enough healthy active yeast in there, it's going to work great. And this is not a viewpoint that I came to through ignorance. It's a viewpoint that I came to through understanding the science behind things and then trying things like that cold dry hopping technique, right? When I tell people about that now, they're like, no, that couldn't possibly work. But sometimes you just kind of have to put all that aside and try it and say, based on what I know, this is at least worth a shot.
I just want to get back and give you guys just a minute to talk about the book again. Drew, maybe you could share just a couple of tips from the Simply Homebrewing book.
Yeah. couple things that you'll see in that book is, talking about simplifying, it's sort of my big bugaboo, simplifying your recipe design. Homebrewers tend to suffer from an abundance of exuberance. And, with, again, like the porter example that we were just talking about, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I've become very well known for talking about, no, you got to figure out a simpler way to brew. It almost always will give you a better result. Denny and I disagree about this, but it usually gives you a better result. And in my mind, it's a better way to start. So that's an example of one of the things that we talk about in the book. Another thing that we talk about is, again, I mentioned it earlier, the grain father, and how to simplify your brew day using some of the technology and equipment that's out there. So I think we cover. Well, we definitely covered everything that we could think of. And one of
Yeah.
and actually one of the other big topics that we talked about in there, that we talked about in the book, is getting over your fear of water chemistry and learning to trust the process enough that you can come out the other side doing things with your water. Because I think that's actually one of the biggest shifts that's happened in homebrewing over the past decade or so, is everybody went from not really giving a damn about their water chemistry to now that's considered to be almost as important as, say, yeast health, in terms of how good your beer actually ends up being. But it's scary math and weird things, and so we walk people through the best ways that we can think of to get something done with your water without having to freak out about it.
Yeah, water is very important to the flavor of the beer because it's, 90% or more of the beer, right?
Right.
Well, it depends upon who you are and how you brew. If you're Fred from the AHA, it's only about 82% of your beer.
Yeah. Denny, you got a couple tips from the book, perhaps?
Well, I already talked about the yeast thing. Drew and I have a little bit of a difference in terms of recipe design. He feels like, the fewest ingredients is the best. I don't see it as quite that cut and dry. My philosophy is use anything in any amount that you need, but make sure you know why it's there and what it's bringing to the beer party. So, we go through a lot about talking about ingredients to help you figure out what to use. We talk about how you can learn the flavors of different ingredients. And again, we do cover a lot of different, like, all-in-one brewing systems. And we call that trading money for simplicity. It all depends on what you want and what works for you. Everybody has different ideas of what makes brewing simple and fun, but the idea is make it simple and fun.
And I think one
Drew,
really good example of something that we do in the book, and I think one example of something that we do in terms of simplifying, and I know you had a lot of fun with it, and I had some fun with it too, was doing 30-minute brews, making it so
20.
that, cutting out. That's right. Yeah, you did 20, I did 30. And,
Right.
Just cutting out as much time that you don't actually necessarily need to spend doing, the full schmagegi.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Drew, where can folks find out a little more about simple homebrewing?
Well, you can always visit our website at experimentalbrew.com. You can listen to the podcast, and we talk about simple homebrewing in there all the time. And of course, simple homebrewing will be available at all your finest book retailers, including Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and also, very importantly, Brewers Publications, who is the publisher of the book.
Yeah. Denny, your closing thoughts on maybe all the topics we discussed today?
It's like everybody right now, for better or worse, has more time on their hands than they did a month ago. So use it to brew, to get out there, clean up your brewery, pull out all your tubing and hoses, stuff like that. Do some deep cleaning on it. But get out there and enjoy your brewery again. Try and take your mind off of what we're dealing with every day.
And Drew, your closing thoughts?
Don't panic. Beer will happen.
Yeah.
Sound advice, yeah. Anyways, I'd like to thank you both for coming on the show. Really appreciate you being here. Drew, over to you.
Yeah, well, hey, thank you so much. It's always great.
And Denny, pleasure to have you on as well.
Thank you, Brad. We really appreciate that you let us come on and just kind of ramble aimlessly for an hour.
Appreciate you guys both being here. And again, my guests today were Drew Beechum and Denny Conn, authors of Experimental Brewing, Simple Home Brewing, and then I want to mention the third book, Homebrew All-Stars, of course. Thanks again, guys. Drew, Denny.
Thank you, Brad.
A big thank you to Drew Beechum and Denny Conn for joining me this week. Thanks also to Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine. They're currently offering 20% off their all-access subscription pass, with access to videos, brewing courses, exclusive articles, and the amazing Craft Beer and Brewing magazine. Go to beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith to get your all-access pass today. Again, that's beerandbrewing.com/BeerSmith. And also the Brew Commander, the new complete brew house controller from Blickman Engineering. The patent-pending Brew Commander is a digital brew house controller with high precision and the ultimate in flexibility. The Brew Commander offers automated step mashing, boil timers, and advanced brew day settings. Command your brew day with the new Brew Commander. To order yours today, go to blickmanengineering.com. Again, that's blickmanengineering.com. And finally, BeerSmith 3 is available on both mobile and desktop platforms. BeerSmith 3 adds mead, wine, and cider support, new Whirlpool hop options, support for high-altitude brewing, and a whole lot more. Check out BeerSmith 3 and get your free 21-day trial today from beersmith.com. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a great brewing week.